ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన NSR ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ NSR ఇంపల్స్.
Hello students, now let us continue with living world. Now in living world we have done with definition. What are the different parameters to define a living organism? We say growth, metabolism and consciousness, cellular organization, right, and different cellular interactions. Of course we discussed movement, spontaneous and induced movement, that will come under interactions. Now let us continue with the further parameter. What we have is nothing but consciousness. The next parameter, it's nothing but what? Consciousness. What's the meaning of consciousness here? So here we say that all living organisms are aware of their surroundings. Okay, what do we say? All living organisms are aware of their surroundings, meaning the organisms know what's happening in their surrounding. Every organism knows what's happening in their surrounding. That itself is called the property called as consciousness. Means every organism knows what's happening in its own environment. So of their surroundings are, they say that of their environment. Surroundings are of their environment. Now, so if you look at consciousness, we say that it's a property of living organisms. That means we say every living organism knowing what's happening in the environment itself is a property of all living organisms. Now let us concentrate on self-consciousness. What is the meaning of self-consciousness? Self-consciousness is only the property of human beings. Is only the property of human beings. Okay, that means what we have to say here, only human beings knows what's happening in their environment. It's only the property of human beings because human beings knows what they are, with what they are made up of, with which organ they are made up of, and what's happening inside the human being. That's nothing but digestion, respiration. Human being knows himself what's happening in its own body. That is nothing but we call a self-consciousness. That means they know about themselves. The organism, or we say the human beings, they know about themselves. They know about themselves. Okay, they know about themselves means with what we are made up of, what to eat and what processes are going on inside the human body, everything is known to human beings. We say self-consciousness is only the property of human beings. Now if you look at, see here, now so consciousness is referred as, we say it is a defining property of living organisms. A defining property of living organisms. Meaning, so consciousness is the property which we use to define a living organisms. Now so far what are the properties we discussed here? Now for defining a living organism, what are the parameters we have taken into consideration? What parameters we have studied in defining a living organism? Now let us take into consideration of growth, then metabolism, even we studied about reproduction, right. Apart from this, even we discussed about cellular organization, right? And then interactions. Under interactions, what else we studied? We studied about the movement. Under interactions, we studied about the movements of the organisms, right, including the property called as consciousness, right. So, with these parameters, we are trying to define a definition for a living organism. So, with these parameters, if they exhibit these parameters, we say that these are exhibited by organism, which is referred as a living organism, or we say it exhibit all metabolic processes, biotic in nature, right. So, after we discuss about all these parameters, now let us come back to the definition part. Once again, they define a living organism. I hope you got it this right. What is consciousness? All living organisms are aware of their surroundings and environment. What is happening in the environment? Organism knows, that itself is called as consciousness, right. At the same time, it is a property of living organism, and self-consciousness is only the property of human beings. No other animal knows with what it is made up of. It is only the property of human beings. What is self-consciousness? Human beings, they know, here what you have to write, they know about themselves. So, self-consciousness is only the property of human beings. So, with all parameters, we try to define a living organism now. Okay. So, now finally let us come back to definition of the living organism. How do we define living organism? So, let us come to a definition of living organism. Right. After we study all these parameters, when we study all these parameters, finally once again we are trying to give definition to the living organism. How do we define this? We say self-evolving. Self-evolving is related to which property? It is related to what is called reproduction. Self-evolving means one organism gives rise to another organism. Reproduction. In reproduction, a parent gives rise to offspring. So, organism is self-evolving. Then self-replicating. If you take in unicellular organisms, one organism replicate and produces two daughter cells by binary fission, right. Self-evolving, self-replicating and self-regulating, what we say, interactive system. Self-regulating means an organism regulate by itself all metabolic processes like digestion, respiration, it regulates its own processes. When an organism feels hungry, it takes food. It does not feel hungry, it does not take the food. So, it regulates its own system, it has ability to multiply, it can evolve itself and also capable of responding to external stimuli, capable of responding to external stimuli. It has ability to respond to external stimuli. Any change in the environment is called stimuli. The organism will show response to the stimuli. This response itself is called irritation. Now, they are capable of responding to external stimuli. If they exhibit these properties, then it can be defined it as a living organism. Okay, finally, after we study all the parameters in defining a living organism, final definition what we can study here is an organism said to be self-evolving, self-replicating, self-regulating system. It has its own regulating system and also capable of responding to external stimuli, then we call that as a living organism. Why? Because interactions, it keeps showing interactions, it shows cellular organization, it does many metabolic processes, it grows in size, it keeps moving from one place to other place, it knows what is happening in the environment. With these properties, this is a final definition which we can give for a defining a living organism. Once again I say this is very important. We say living organism self-evolving. So, this definition should be in your mind: self-evolving, self-regulating and self-replicating, capable of showing response to external stimuli, itself is called as a living organism. Now, let us continue further. Let us continue. So, we say diversity in the living world. We say a diversity in the living world. What is the meaning of diversity in the living world? When we say diversity meaning, it means that there is a different kind of organisms, exist in the same environment. Right? What do we say? Different kind of organisms, they exist in the same environment. What is the meaning of this? If you look at, for example, you take, this is a environment, let us take, maybe let us take a forest environment. In forest environment, what do we find? We find different things like plants, animals, even you find pond. In pond we find aquatic organisms. Yes or no, right? And we find different type of organisms existing in that. They may be primary consumers, secondary consumers, carnivores, omnivores, all different type of animals are existing. So, plants also grow in size, they are also living organisms. Animals also grow in size, they are also living organisms. But if you look at for all these organisms, the environment is same. Environment is same means they have same light and they have same temperature they experience, and they have same climatic conditions like humidity and moisture, right. Along with that they experience same pressure, right. So, everything is same. For all these are different type of organisms. Some are called plants, some are called animals, some are called aquatic organisms. You find all in the same environment. In the same environment, meaning here all exhibit same light intensity, same temperature, same humidity, same moisture, same pressure. But here they exist in a different structure, and they does, because of different structure, these all organisms they does a different functions. Okay, that means the living organisms what are existing in this environment, what are existing in the same environment, even though they are born and brought up by the same environment, same light they have, temperature, humidity, moisture, everything is same, even though they are born and brought up by the same environment, why do you think they differ in terms of structure and function? Why do you think some plants, like we find leaves, branches, they are called plants, some have legs, they keep walking here and there, we call animals, some we find growing in water, they have different structure and function. My basic question is, when all are born and brought up by the same environment, they all are growing in the same environment, having same parameters, then why do they differ in terms of their structure and function? The answer for this question is because of their genetic constitution. We all know it very well. Because of their genes and genetic constituents, Genetic constitution, better you can write down genetic constitution. Okay, all organisms, they have their own structure, they have their own function because they have genetic composition or they have their own genetic constitution. That is why they differ in structure and function even though they are born and brought up by the same environment. All organisms have brought by same environment, but they have different genetic constitution. That is why they differ in their structure and function. That itself is called as diversity. What is the meaning of diversity? A different variety of organisms keep growing in the same environment. Environment is same. All parameters of environment is same, but organisms are differ. Why? All organisms are born and brought up by the same environment. When all are growing in the same environment, they all look similar, right? No. But they are not looking similar. Why? Because every organism has its own genetic constitution. Every organism has its own structure and function, and that itself is called as what? Diversity. Now, if you look at diversity in the living world, how the way we can define it? We say a different kind of organisms exist in the same environment. Why do you find different type of organisms? For example, if you take forest, in this we find different type of plants, herbs, shrubs, trees and different type of plants, a different type of aquatic animals and different type of animals we find, and they all are brought up by the same environment having same parameters, but they differ in structure and function. It is because of genetic constitution, and that itself is called as diversity. Existence of different variety of organisms in the environment, it is called diversity. Now, what our scientists are doing, I think keep watching Discovery channels and all that. The scientists, they go to the forest and try to see the life cycles of, they try to discover the different life cycles of different type of animals, and they study about their life cycles. So, here all together in the entire world, if you take the total number of species starting from tiny insects till the human beings, to the cruel animals and all that, if you look at, so whenever we say that number of known species so far discovered, okay, number of known species so far discovered, it is approximately 1.7 to 1.8 million billions. Very, very important. So far in the entire world in different type of forest, we find approximately 11 to what you say 12 billion species are existing. Billion species are existing. In this 11 to 12 are million species across the world exist in different forests. But so far our scientists identified and we know about number of species only 1.7 to 1.8. That means still we have to identify 10 or 11 different type of species existing in different parts of the world, right. So, when you talk about diversity in the living world, then we have to go with the concept called as taxonomy. That means identification for classification of organisms, we have to study about taxonomy. So, let us talk about taxonomy. What is taxonomy here? It is nothing but the branch of science which deals with classification of living organisms. But here we are discussing about plants. Let us make it as plants. Okay. So, when you study the separate branch of science, a branch of science which deals with classification of plants, classification of living organisms itself is called as taxonomy. Who is the scientist of this? I already told you, Carolus von Linnaeus, who is referred as father of taxonomy, who is referred as a father of taxonomy. Taxonomy is very important branch of science which always deals with the classification of organisms. Now, how the way, what the components? So, taxonomy, if you look at, it always talk about how organisms are classified. So, if you take the early classification, early classification of plants, we already have studied about Aristotle based upon the uses. Early classification is based on uses, or we say economic uses of plants. Economic uses. Suppose if you get oil from the plant, we call the plant as oil yielding plant. Suppose if you get fiber from the plant, we call them as a fiber yielding plants. If you get medicines, we call them as medicinal plants, like that. Earlier classification is purely based upon economic uses. Right. Later, Aristotle is the one who classified plants into 3 types. We know that into herbs, shrubs, as well as trees. Right. So, if you look at, slowly there was an improvement in taking into consideration of classification of organisms. Now, coming to the taxonomy. So, here for the classification of plants, taxonomy has the 4 components. For the classification of plants, taxonomy has the 4 components. The branch of taxonomy has the 4 components. What are they? Let us make a list of them. The process of characterization, identification, nomenclature, then classification. So, these are nothing but the 4 important components of what you call taxonomy. So, we are going to discuss about all 4 components of taxonomy. When we say taxonomy, the process of characterization, identification, nomenclature and classification of organisms itself is called as taxonomy. Now, if you look at, taxonomy is more closely related with another branch called systematics. Another branch called as what? A systematic. Taxonomy, now it is closely related with what is called systematics. What is systematic? It is nothing but, I am writing down the definition, the study of a different kind of organisms, in a systematic sequence, based on evolutionary relationship between organisms. Evolutionary relationship between organisms. What is the meaning of this? Now, if you look at, systematic is another branch of science. Taxonomy and systematics both are interrelated, closely related. These 2 branches are very much essential to study about all the 4 components. Now, what is systematics here? It is nothing but study of a different kind of organisms, existence of different variety of organisms, and we put them in a systematic sequence. In a proper sequence we keep them, we align them based on evolutionary relationship between organisms. So, if you look at this particular part, we mainly talk about here systematic arrangement of organisms. What is systematic sequence here? Or we say systematics is also defined as systematic is also defined as a systematic arrangement of organisms. Systematic arrangement of organisms. What is the meaning of systematic arrangement of organisms? We say that unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. First we start keeping in unicellular organisms, slowly we keep multicellular organisms. Then we say initially we keep prokaryotic organisms, later we keep eukaryotic organisms, right. First we say what we call monera, means initially formed organisms, later we talk about plants and animals. That means monera is a lower organism, plants and animals are nothing but higher organisms. So, if you start studying about the organisms, how they are produced in environment, you will start keeping in a systematic arrangement. First unicellular, then multicellular. Then we talk about prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and monera, lower organisms, and higher organisms like plants and animals. The systematic arrangement of organisms itself is called as systematics, where we are going to study about different kind of organisms in a systematic sequence based on evolutionary relationship between organisms. What is evolutionary relationship? How eukaryotic organisms are produced from prokaryotes. What characteristics are common in evolving eukaryotes from the prokaryotes. Similarly, what characteristics are common for multicellular organisms evolving from unicellular organisms. It also mainly it explains about evolutionary trends in living organisms. So, this all mainly evolutionary relationship. So, these all points are related to what? A branch called as systematics. I repeat, so here taxonomy is nothing but what? A branch of science which deals with classification of organisms. How do we classify organisms? That means taxonomy includes four components. What are they? Characterization, identification, nomenclature and classification. Who is the father of taxonomy? We say Carolus von Linnaeus. Now, this particular branch of taxonomy, it is closely related with another branch called systematics. What is systematic here? Systematic is nothing but a study of a different kind of organisms which we keep them in a systematic sequence and based on evolutionary relationship between organisms. That means here systematics, it's in short form, it also can be defined as a systematic arrangement of organisms in a sequence we are studying, and mainly it also speaks about evolutionary trends in the living organisms. What is meaning evolutionary trends here? Development of multicellular organisms from unicellular organisms, development of eukaryotes from prokaryotic organisms, formation of higher organisms from lower organisms. What is monera and all that we are going to study in the next concept. Now, who is the scientist to whom we are speaking about here? Let us continue here, systematics. Now, if you take the systematics here, so if you take the systematics here, systematics is here if you look at. So, who is a scientist? We speak about Linnaeus. Linnaeus has written two books, you know it very well. One of the book is Systema Naturae. Do you all remember? We have two. What are they? One is Species Plantarum, other one is nothing but what? Systema Naturae. So, Linnaeus has written a book. Of course, we studied about the two books. What the two books? One is Species Plantarum, other one is Systema Naturae. Systema Naturae included the information about systematics. Okay, the book what was written by Linnaeus is Systema Naturae, which included the information about systematics and also about the branch of science called as taxonomy. Right guys, now let us continue. Our main concept is taxonomy. Taxonomy meaning classification of organisms. Classification of organisms includes what? The four components. Now we need to discuss in detail about each and every component. So let us continue with what is called as taxonomy. let us continue with taxonomy. Now taxonomy, what do we say? Taxonomy it mainly speaks about what? Classification of organisms. What is the main definition for taxonomy? It says that classification of organisms. So when you see classification of organisms, so importantly we need to discuss about the 4 components. We need to discuss about the 4 components. Again I am writing in the sequence. So here we have to study about characterization and then followed by identification, then nomenclature, followed by the last one is classification. So taxonomy it's nothing but the process of study of classification of organism, or we can define the branch of science which deals with classification of organisms. It includes 4 components. Now it's a time for us to study each component. What is the first component in this? Characterization. What's the meaning of characterization? For example, we have taken a forest. Let us take that. An ecologist is a scientist who studies about different types of plants existing in the environment, who is called as an ecologist. Let us say that here in the forest we find different plants are existing. Okay, let us take the different plants are being existing. So maybe he saw that there is one plant, he could not able to identify the characteristics of this particular plant. Meaning, so he saw the first plant, he know the name of the scientific name of the first plant. He has gone to second plant, even he know the scientific name of this particular plant. He know the third plant, or like that a 10th plant or 12th plant when he could able to see, he could not able to identify this plant. This may be entirely a new plant. It may be entirely a new plant, meaning so far no one has discovered about this plant, no one knows about this plant, no scientists have discovered about this plant, it is entirely a new variety, or maybe it may be a discovered or existing variety, discovered existing variety, meaning what? It may be already been discovered by some scientists, but this ecologist do not know the name of this plant. That means it may be entirely a new plant, so far no one has discovered, maybe it is discovered an existing variety, already maybe some scientists have discovered, but he do not know the name of this particular plant. Okay. Then at that time what he has to do? So let us take, for him it is a new plant, may be discovered by some scientist and it is already known to the world, but this particular scientist do not know. Let us imagine. Then what is the first thing he will do? The first step what he will do, it is nothing but it is called as characterization. What is the meaning of characterization? Now he will start noting down the characteristics of a new plant, characters of a new plant for identification, Okay. So it may be entirely a new plant, it has to be identified. Then what he will do? He has to note down the characters. What are the characteristics of this particular plant? So what characteristics will come? Let us take a vegetative characters. So when you take the vegetative characters, what all will come? What type of root is existing? What type of stem is there? How leaves are arranged? How inflorescence is there? Up to here, this all will come under vegetative characters. Then he will start taking the plant into his hand. He will see what type of root system is there. Maybe the type of root system may be identified a tap root. So he will note down this particular new plant has a tap root. Maybe the stem is solid and colloid or striate, whatever it may be. Leaves are pinnately compound leaf. For example, I am writing a pinnately compound leaves. Maybe inflorescence is racemose. Right. So, first when he don't know about a plant, when he don't know the scientific name of the plant, even he don't know whether it is a discovered already known plant or it is entirely a new unknown plant, he don't know anything. But ecologist has to note down all plants what are existing in the forest. For the sake of world record, he will maintain a different type of plants existing in different type of forest across the world. So, he could not able to identify this plant. So, he will start noting down the characters. Why characteristics are noting down here? It is because it becomes easy for identification. So, first step he need to note down the characters. When he make the list of characters, it is called the first step called characterization. After he note down the vegetative characters, what he will do? He will start noting down the floral characters. Floral characters means what all will come? The characteristics of a flower. Floral characters means characteristics of a flower. What all he has to note down? How the calyx and sepals, how they are arranged, gamosepalous or polysepalous. Then he has to note down about corolla. Then he has to note down about androecium. And then he has to note down about what is called a gynoecium, right. So, different floral parts. Then mainly talk about what? Reproductive organs. Then later he will talk about what are called reproductive characters. What are reproductive characters? Nothing but how the arrangement of stamens, anther. Then how the arrangement of ovary, pistil, carpel, and what type of fertilization. Then he will start note down what are called reproductive characters. When he note down all the characteristics of a plant, that itself is called as the first step in taxonomy, itself is called as what? Characterization. Why he has to note down all the characters? He has to go to the next step called for identification. Got it all of you? Right. So, in the forest, when an ecologist is the one who just make a note of all the existing plants across the world in different forest area. If anyone want to do research, anyone want to extract medicines from the plant, if they want some plants where they are growing, from where do we get information? We get it from world ecologist. Ecologist is the one who takes the note of existing varieties of the plant in different climatic regions in different forests across the world. So, if you take the taxonomy, it is nothing but the classification of organisms. It includes 4 components. If you want to classify the organism, we need to go with the 4 components. In that, what we are discussing, the first one, characterization. So, when ecologists visit the forest, he may be already know the names of the some plants, but there is one plant he could not able to find the name. So, he may be thinking it may be entirely a new plant. So, where no one has discovered so far, or it may be discovered an existing variety which he do not know the name, right. Then what he will do here, suppose it is entirely a new plant, no scientists have discovered, then what he will do, he will keep his own name. Yes, because he is a discovered plant, so he can keep his own name, right. So, what he will do in the first step, he will start noting down the characteristics of a new plant for the sake of identification. So, he will take the plant into hand, he will take the branches, leaves, inflorescence, root, stem, leaves and what type of the characteristics it has, all he will note down, it will come under vegetative characters. Slowly he will note down what are called floral characters. Floral characters means flower, calyx, how it is arranged, free or united, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. In gynoecium what not? Hypothalamus, epithalamus and all characteristics will come including placentation and all that. So, when you talk about these two that come under reproductive characters, all the sake for identification of the plant, that comes under the second component of taxonomy, that comes under second component of taxonomy. So, if it is entirely a new plant, so the ecologist who identified this, he will get the credit that yeah, he identified a new plant, then ecologist will get the choice to keep his own name. Okay. So, let us continue with the second one, what we call it as identification. Guys, so let us keep the morphology revision. So, make sure that you have to go with the revision of morphology, and for this, after this class, try to complete a leaf and inflorescence, right. Make sure that living world, you just continue reading living world. After you complete doing the preparation for the living world, make sure that you spare time. For today's class I am giving the revision of morphology, as I am keep telling you in every class, it's very important. Try to complete revision for leaf and inflorescence.
ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన ఎన్ఎస్ఆర్ ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ ఎన్ఎస్ఆర్ ఇంపల్స్.